Next up in our Honest Look series, going to take an honest look at what's going on with the Florida Gators. Because the standard with that brand and being in the SEC and the expectations in Gainesville, enormously high. We understand it. We'll talk about all that here right now, but first things first, make sure you're subscribed. Would love to have y'all a part of the operation. Had a lot of y'all Florida fans join us throughout the course of this past season. Thank you for that. If you want to be dialed in throughout the entirety of the year, make sure you're subscribed right here to the On Three YouTube channel. Also follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Let me know how you feel about where things stand right now with Billy Napier, because we'll talk about how we feel about it right now on this show. And the sense I would get, it's probably a mixed bag across the board, but there is definitely one portion of the fan base that is just fed up and saying, listen, we don't go 5-7 at Florida. We don't. Not a thing we do here. I would imagine there's probably another portion of the fan base that is, sort of moved on from disappointed, and there's probably some anger there. There's probably some frustration, some rage saying we don't have the right guy. Can I just say first and just level with y'all, like, hey, I get it. I get it. That Florida brand, it means something. Playing ball in the swamp, it means something. Won't back down in that fourth quarter, like everything that comes with Florida, I understand it all has a little bit extra juice to it because it's Florida. There's some schools across the country that are just kind of like that, in that area, or in that tier rather, as a program. Texas being one of them, Georgia being one of them, Ohio State being one of them. Like the standard you hold yourself to, brand, tradition, history, all that, way up here for a reason. That's the area I'm talking about. But when we look at what happened this past season, yes, there's some unacceptable things that happened. Rolled by Kentucky. The killer from Arkansas in overtime. Meltdown at Missouri. That fourth down stop that was not a stop, actually. Missouri picked it up and ended up winning the game that way. But, that all is frustrating and in a vacuum, unacceptable. But I think we also, like this segment's about, take an honest look at where things stand right now. Because I think context for Florida is massive. Absolutely massive. Billy Napier walked into a situation where the house was not in a good spot. Structurally, they were not good. Culturally, I don't believe they were very good. Talent-wise, they were solid, but they weren't good where you had to be good, which was, of course, the line of scrimmage and, of course, on the defensive side of the ball. They were not deep enough there. Okay? So he's trying to put this house back together in the most difficult climate in the entire country, which is the SEC. And it's been 2 seasons. And I'll be the first to say it, I am usually one of the last individuals to say, let's fire a coach. I have a hard time getting behind that. I usually think that just there's so much going on within a football team. There's 2 things. There's 2 things that I'm running my filter for if you should fire a coach or not. And just to be clear, I don't think you're at this point yet with Billy Napier. There's 2 things that I see that would cause me to give up. The first is if there's no direction. That's not the case at Florida. Currently have a top 10 class in 2024. Graham Mertz, say what you want about him when he was at Wisconsin. He is night and day better given this past season transferring to Florida. There's direction there. He's coming back for another year. Eugene Wilson, you got a diamond in the rough with him. Not even a diamond in the rough. He's just a diamond, period. He was one of the best players in that cycle as well. We were really high on him here at On 3. Dude's a dog. There's direction here. And you say, well, JD, we lost as many games as we did last year. We won 6 the year before. Yes, I understand that. But again, talking about things that don't show up exactly in the box score. You don't show up in the resume. You look at Florida's season last year, they had several games that they lost by 1 score. And so that you don't get credit for being close and losing. You don't get credit for covering a spread or what have you. But at the end of the day, there still has to be something to be said for the direction at Florida. It's not substantial on a resume, but it still shows up, I think, when you watch them play. The second thing that I look at is if there's any buy-in from the team. If there's no buy-in from the team and there's no direction, I'm like, all right, we just clearly are a ship without a rudder. We're not going anywhere, and the crew on this ship is just upset. That's not what I see when I watch Florida. I see a team that battles and scratches and claws. Look at that game against South Carolina. Say what you want about South Carolina. They came back from 10 down in the fourth quarter. You don't do that if you don't have some buy-in. You don't battle all the way throughout the end of the season if you don't have some buy-in. The guys on that team, I promise you, they could have hung it up a long time ago. They could have mailed it in a long time ago. Instead, they went toe-to-toe with one of the best teams in the country in Florida State and probably should have won that football game had they kept their foot on the gas. Did it without a starting quarterback as well, just so we're on the same page there. So I understand the frustration. I do. But the way that it feels to me 2 years into the Billy Napier era, he's trying to push this roster and this team to a place where they can get over the hump. And it's a team that I think just hasn't figured out how to win yet by nature of those games we talked about, by nature of the meltdowns they've had in close spots. Just haven't figured out how to win yet. And if you want to give up on Billy Napier, totally your prerogative. But I would ask you to take a closer look at what's happening in Tallahassee. And now, Florida fans, I understand you're not going to like to hear this, but I would just say it deserves a little bit of a investigation, if you will, to what's going on there. Florida State went 3-6 in 2020. Weird year, COVID year, bad year, whatever. The next season, Florida State goes 5-7. They lost 4 games by 1 score. You had people saying, well, Mike Norvell is going to be out by Halloween. He's not even the right guy there. It was a train wreck. We all know what's going on here. 4 games by 1 score. Again, you don't get credit for losing games close, but it showed me there was something there. They're in those ball games. They're competitive. In 2022, 10-win season. This past year, undefeated season. In the regular season, that is. I think if they don't have success in year 3, we can start to have this conversation. But let's not act like this is just a team that is so far gone and they're just so far off the rails. Like, no, there's a lot here to be encouraged by Florida. And I'm not giving you moral victories. I'm not saying that we should just totally excuse the bad. But I do think to ignore the good is just irresponsible. So going back to what I was saying, if there's not a pop in 2024, at that point I'm saying, okay, we're 3 years into this. We've got 36 games, give or take, of data. At that point, now we know what we have in Billy Napier. At that point, now we can have those more difficult conversations about what should happen going forward. But at the time of us recording this, at the time of where we are right now with Florida, I still have a hard time believing with those 2 things that I'm looking at. I see direction, talent acquisition with the top 10 class right now, and a team that is bought in, and a quarterback that I think is definitely improving from where he was at Wisconsin to where he is now in Gainesville and coming back for another year. There's direction, there's buy-in. For that reason, I'm still in on Billy Napier. I'm not saying I think he's going to lead them to a national championship this upcoming season, but I do think to sell your stock in Billy Napier at this point in time might be a little bit too knee-jerky. Last thing I'll say, there's a lot of outrage about being 5-7. I understand that. Again, what we said about this whole thing, like the standard at Florida is the standard. You got to uphold it. But let's not act like this was some wildly surprising situation. The over-under win total for Florida was 5.5 in Las Vegas. So Florida fans, there was some gauge here that, hey, this might be a year where we're fighting to make a bowl game. Get down to the last game of the season, you got 5 wins, you're fighting to make a bowl game. Yes, the under hit there, and Vegas doesn't make the rules for how you're supposed to play during the season, but I just want to say when it comes to context, there wasn't this expectation for Florida to go win 8-9 ball games and they just fell on their face. That wasn't the case. Florida's getting there. We're in the same spot next year. We're missing a bowl game. Let's talk about it then. But I think for me, again, I see direction and I see buy-in. And for that reason, I think for Florida fans, for me, it's too early to sell stock. But again, curious to hear about y'all's feelings on this. Curious to hear where y'all stand on this. Get at me on Twitter and on Instagram at JDPacal, and we'll talk about it. Appreciate y'all. Love y'all. Going to keep this party rolling, and we will see y'all next time. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.